Mafia Boss pretended to sleep to test his fat maid. What she did left him in tears. Hello everyone, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us go back to our main character. Some tests reveal loyalty. The rare ones reveal love before either heart is ready to admit it. The first thing Abigail Brooks noticed was the silence. The Moretti estate was never truly quiet. Somewhere beyond the towering windows, gardeners trimmed hedges with military precision, security teams exchanged short messages through hidden earpieces, and expensive clocks whispered away the afternoon. Yet today, the silence inside the master bedroom felt different, heavier, almost as though the mansion itself was holding its breath. Abigail adjusted the tray balanced carefully in her hands, trying not to spill the steaming bowl of chicken soup while nudging the bedroom door open with her elbow. At 28, she had learned to laugh at her own clumsiness before anyone else could. Her auburn ponytail had already escaped its elastic band, and a tiny streak of flour still rested on her cheek from helping the kitchen staff bake fresh bread that morning. She never noticed things like that. Other people always did. "Mr. Moretti?" she whispered. No answer came. Luca Moretti lay perfectly still beneath the gray comforter, one powerful arm resting outside the blanket. Even unconscious, he looked intimidating. Tattoos disappeared beneath the rolled sleeve of his white shirt and climbed the side of his neck before fading beneath his jawline. Every employee in the mansion knew stories about him. Some were true. Most were exaggerated. Abigail had worked there for only 3 weeks, long enough to discover one thing for herself. He never raised his voice. Somehow that made him even harder to read. Earlier that morning, his physician had quietly informed the household that exhaustion and a high fever had finally forced the Mafia Boss to stay in bed. Orders were simple. Keep the room calm. Keep visitors away. Make sure he rested. Abigail set the tray down as gently as possible. The spoon rattled anyway. She froze, waiting for him to react. Nothing. Great job, she muttered to herself under her breath. Smooth as always. She reached for the cool washcloth resting in the silver basin and carefully folded it before placing it across his forehead. Her movements were slow, uncertain, almost apologetic. "You probably don't even know my name," she said softly with a nervous smile. "Honestly, that's okay." Hidden beneath nearly invisible cameras tucked inside carved wooden shelves, Luca heard every word. His breathing remained perfectly even. His eyelids never moved. The fever had been real. The collapse had not. After years of betrayal disguised as loyalty, he trusted evidence more than promises. His head of security believed the new Maid deserved a deeper background investigation. Another advisor insisted she was too kind to survive inside a house built on secrets. Luca preferred his own method. Leave temptation alone with opportunity. Watch what happened. Abigail noticed a prescription bottle sitting empty beside the lamp. She frowned. Already out. She glanced toward the medicine cabinet before stopping herself. "No, don't snoop," she sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. "Unless you actually need it." After several awkward seconds of arguing with herself, she opened only the cabinet labeled medical supplies. Inside, everything was arranged with impossible precision. Thermometers, bandages, medication sorted alphabetically. She searched carefully until she found the refill requested by the doctor earlier that morning. There you are. Relief spread across her face like sunlight after rain. She poured fresh water, measured the medicine twice, just to be sure, then hesitated. "You can't exactly swallow while pretending." She laughed quietly before covering her mouth. "Sorry, that was a terrible joke." Even with his eyes closed, Luca almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he listened as she adjusted the blanket higher around his shoulders after noticing the room had become cooler. Then something unexpected happened. Abigail removed the cardigan she had been wearing despite the chilly air and gently folded it across his feet. "Cold feet make everybody miserable," she whispered. "My grandpa used to complain about that all winter." She never looked toward the expensive watch resting on the nightstand. Never glanced at the safe concealed behind the painting. Never touched the envelope containing more cash than she had earned in 5 years. Instead, she quietly picked up the empty soup bowl. "I'll warm this again later," she said. Nobody should wake up hungry. As she turned toward the door, a faint vibration buzzed from the forgotten phone lying beneath the bedside table. The screen lit up with one anonymous message before disappearing into darkness again. It read only 6 words. She must never leave that room alive. Edit. The anonymous message vanished before Abigail could read it again, leaving only her own puzzled reflection on the dark phone screen. She blinked twice, wondering if exhaustion had played a trick on her eyes. The mansion was filled with encrypted phones, private conversations, and security alerts that had nothing to do with a housemaid earning barely enough to pay rent on a tiny apartment across town. She quietly slid the phone back beneath the bedside table exactly where she had found it. "Not my business," she whispered, convincing herself more than anyone else. As she picked up the tray, the bedroom door opened just enough for the family physician to step inside. Dr. Harold Bennett gave Luca another quick examination before smiling politely at Abigail. "His fever is improving. Thank you for staying attentive." Abigail nodded. "I just hope he feels better soon." The doctor noticed the neatly organized medication beside the bed and raised an eyebrow. "You found the refill?" Abigail smiled sheepishly. "It was labeled. I figured that was where it belonged." Dr. Bennett gave an approving nod before leaving without another word. Hidden beneath closed eyelids, Luca memorized every detail. She had followed instructions without crossing boundaries. That combination had become surprisingly rare in his world. An hour later, Abigail returned carrying fresh soup, a thermometer, and a small vase holding wild daisies collected from the edge of the estate's walking trail. She paused before placing the flowers on a distant bookshelf instead of the nightstand. "Too much pollen near someone with a fever," she murmured. "Grandpa would complain." She laughed softly at the memory before accidentally bumping her elbow against the tray. The spoon bounced onto the carpet with an embarrassing clink. "Seriously?" she sighed at herself. "One day I am going to walk across this room without dropping something." She quickly retrieved the spoon, replaced it with a clean one from the tray, and glanced toward Luca, relieved that he appeared to remain asleep. The quiet moment was interrupted by sharp footsteps outside the room. Eleanor Graves, the estate manager, entered carrying a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Her posture was flawless, her expression unreadable. "Miss Brooks," she said evenly, "there are dozens of employees in this house. Do not become distracted by thinking you are special because you have temporary nursing duties." Abigail immediately straightened. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor's eyes drifted toward the flowers. "Those are not part of the approved room arrangement." Abigail reached for them. "I am sorry. I thought they might brighten the room." Eleanor gently removed the vase without raising her voice. "This house values order above sentiment." After she disappeared into the hallway, Abigail quietly stared at the empty spot where the flowers had been. She looked disappointed for exactly 3 seconds before smiling again. "Maybe flowers are not his thing," she whispered. "That is okay." She picked up the tray and prepared to leave when she noticed Luca's hand resting partly outside the blanket. The room had become cooler as rain clouds rolled across the afternoon sky. Without hesitation, she tucked the blanket around his wrist so carefully that even the fabric barely rustled. "Everybody deserves to be comfortable," she said. "Even people who scare the entire city." For the first time that day, Luca's heartbeat became impossible to ignore. Not because of fever, because no one had adjusted his blanket in nearly 15 years. They protected him. They obeyed him. They feared disappointing him. But simple kindness without expectation had quietly disappeared from his life long ago. As Abigail reached the doorway, laughter echoed faintly from downstairs where several staff members gathered for their afternoon break. She slowed after hearing her own name. "The new girl actually thinks the boss notices people like us," one voice mocked. Another answered with a chuckle. "Give her another week. This place changes everyone." Abigail remained still for a moment, then simply smiled to herself instead of responding. "Maybe," she whispered, "but I do not have to let it change me." She walked away before anyone realized she had overheard them. Minutes later, after the hallway finally fell silent, Luca slowly opened his eyes for the first time all afternoon. His gaze settled on the folded cardigan still covering his feet. Then it shifted toward the hidden security monitor built into the wall beside his bed. A new notification flashed across the encrypted screen. "Security alert. Unauthorized employee access detected inside the East Wing exactly 38 minutes earlier." The flashing notification lingered on the hidden monitor long after the hallway outside became quiet. Luca remained seated on the edge of the bed, the fever finally fading beneath a calm determination that had carried him through years of impossible decisions. His fingers brushed the folded cardigan still resting near his feet. It smelled faintly of vanilla and fresh laundry, ordinary scents that somehow felt foreign inside a mansion where everything was polished to perfection. He slipped the cardigan into a nearby chair before activating the security system built into the wall. Within seconds, surveillance footage from the East Wing appeared across several screens. Timestamps rolled backward until the unauthorized access alert appeared. A maintenance employee entered a restricted corridor carrying a toolbox. Nothing unusual. 30 seconds later, the same man disappeared from view for nearly 4 minutes before reappearing without the toolbox. Luca narrowed his eyes. For missing minutes inside a hallway with no blind spots should have been impossible. Someone had deliberately disabled one of his cameras. A soft knock interrupted his concentration. Dominic Russo, his longtime chief of security, stepped quietly into the room. "You should still be resting," Dominic said. Luca answered with a faint smile. "I have rested enough." Dominic glanced toward the surveillance screens. "The investigation has already started." Luca folded his hands together. "Leave the maintenance worker alone for now." Dominic frowned. "You think he is innocent?" "I think someone wants us to notice him." Dominic studied Luca for a long moment before giving a slow nod. "You saw something." "I did." Luca did not explain further. Trust had always been earned in pieces. Even with his closest allies, he preferred certainty over assumptions. Downstairs, Abigail carried a basket of fresh towels toward the laundry room while humming quietly to herself. Her cheerful tune stopped the moment she noticed Mrs. Linda Carter, one of the elderly housekeepers, struggling to lift a heavy container of cleaning supplies onto a shelf. Without thinking twice, Abigail hurried over. "Please let me help." Linda smiled with relief. "Thank you, sweetheart. My shoulder has been bothering me all week." Abigail lifted the container with both hands, nearly losing her balance before catching herself against the shelf. Linda laughed warmly. "You always make me nervous for a second." Abigail laughed with her. "Me too." Neither woman noticed a pair of watchful eyes observing them from the security office monitor. Luca quietly watched as Abigail spent the next 15 minutes helping Linda finish work that was never part of her own assignment. Nobody asked her to stay. Nobody promised extra pay. She simply noticed someone needed help. Dominic folded his arms. That is the third time today she has delayed her own work for someone else. Does she do it often? Luca asked. According to the cameras, every day since she arrived. Luca looked away from the monitor, thoughtful rather than impressed. Genuine kindness repeated itself without expecting applause. That was much harder to fake than a smile. Later that evening, Abigail returned to the kitchen carrying an empty tray after checking on Luca one last time before dinner. The head chef frowned as he counted prepared meals. "We are one serving short." Several employees exchanged confused looks until Eleanor Graves entered the room, holding a handwritten inventory sheet. "Someone removed a dinner portion without authorization," she announced calmly. Her gaze slowly settled on Abigail. "Miss Brooks, you were the last person assigned to the kitchen." Abigail blinked in surprise. "I only delivered Mr. Moretti's tray." Eleanor placed the inventory sheet onto the counter. "Then perhaps you can explain why another meal has disappeared." Abigail searched her memory, confusion replacing her usual easy smile. Before she could answer, Linda stepped forward, her face filled with guilt. She opened her mouth to speak, but Abigail gently touched her arm and offered the smallest shake of her head. "If there was a mistake," Abigail said quietly, "I will take responsibility." Upstairs, hidden behind another security screen, Luca watched every second of the exchange. For the first time since beginning his test, he leaned forward instead of remaining perfectly still. Something about the look that passed between Abigail and the elderly housekeeper told him the missing dinner was only the beginning of a much larger secret. Abigail stood quietly while the kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence. No one accused her outright, yet no one defended her either. Eleanor Graves rested both hands on the counter, her expression as composed as ever. "The missing meal must be accounted for," she said. Abigail looked toward the elderly housekeeper beside her and noticed the worry written across Linda Carter's face. "It was enough. Please deduct it from my paycheck," Abigail replied gently. "It was my responsibility to keep track of the trays." Linda's lips parted, ready to object, but Abigail offered a tiny smile that asked her not to. Eleanor studied both women for several long seconds before making a short note on her clipboard. Very well. Be more careful next time. As soon as she walked away, Linda's eyes filled with gratitude. You should not have done that, she whispered. Abigail shrugged with an awkward grin. I can skip fancy coffee for a few weeks. Besides, everybody deserves a little help sometimes. Upstairs, Luca watched the exchange through the security feed without making a sound. Dominic Russo stood beside him with folded arms. She accepted punishment for something she did not do. Luca remained focused on the monitor. Find out where the missing dinner actually went. Less than 20 minutes later, Dominic returned carrying a tablet. The security cameras outside the service entrance caught Linda leaving with the meal after her shift. She stopped 3 blocks away. He tapped the screen again. The footage revealed Linda handing the covered container to an elderly man sitting alone on a worn apartment porch with his leg in a medical brace. Luca watched as Linda kissed the man's forehead before helping him inside. Dominic lowered the tablet. Her husband, recovering from surgery. Luca slowly leaned back. And Abigail knew. Apparently. Yet she protected Linda without expecting anyone to notice. Dominic gave a thoughtful nod. Most people protect themselves first. Luca looked toward the bedroom window where rain tapped softly against the glass. That is why most people never surprise me. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the estate after the storm finally passed. Abigail hurried through the hallway carrying fresh linens balanced almost higher than her head. She could barely see where she was going. Excuse me, coming through probably. She called before the stack tilted sideways. Several towels floated into the air like oversized snowflakes. One landed directly on Dominic's shoulders just as he rounded the corner. Abigail froze in horror. Oh no, I am so sorry. Dominic blinked once before removing the towel from his face. For one awkward second, neither of them spoke. Then Abigail burst into embarrassed laughter at herself. I promise I am much better at folding them than transporting them. To her complete surprise, the normally serious security chief allowed the smallest hint of a smile. I will remember that. As she hurried away gathering runaway towels, Dominic quietly shook his head. Interesting, he murmured. Hidden behind the slightly open bedroom door, Luca had witnessed the entire exchange. It was the first genuine smile he had ever seen from Dominic inside the mansion. That amused him more than he expected. Later that afternoon, Dr. Harold Bennett officially declared that Luca's fever had broken. Word spread quickly through the household that the boss would likely resume work within. Another day, Abigail prepared one final tray with fresh tea, soup, and neatly sliced fruit before carrying it upstairs. She knocked softly before entering. Believing he was still asleep, she carefully straightened the books on the nearby table and quietly collected yesterday's medicine bottles. As she bent to retrieve one that had rolled beneath the chair, her hand accidentally brushed against a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the cushion. She pulled it free without thinking. Across the top, written in neat black ink, were only 3 chilling words. She is watching you. Abigail stared at the folded note for only a heartbeat before her common sense returned. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and impossible to place. She turned the paper over, hoping to find another clue, but the back remained completely blank. That is unsettling, she whispered. Instead of slipping it into her pocket, she carefully returned it beneath the chair exactly where she had found it. Curiosity had gotten people into trouble long before she had ever arrived at the Moretti estate. She preferred finishing her work to chasing mysteries that clearly belonged to someone else. After placing the fresh tea beside the bed, she quietly left the room, never noticing that Luca had opened his eyes the instant the door clicked shut. He rose without hesitation, retrieved the note, and studied it beneath the afternoon light. The message was not intended for Abigail. It was intended for whoever happened to discover it. Someone inside his own home was testing reactions just as carefully as he had been testing hers. A few minutes later, Dominic joined him inside the study. Luca handed him the note. No fingerprints? Dominic asked. Luca slowly shook his head. Whoever placed it expected it to be handled. Dominic examined the handwriting. Do you think it is connected to yesterday's security alert? Luca looked toward the rain-washed gardens beyond the window. Nothing inside this house happens by accident anymore. Downstairs, Abigail finished polishing the library shelves before finding Linda Carter sorting old donation boxes near the service entrance. You should have let me tell the truth. Yesterday, Linda said quietly. Abigail smiled while lifting another box onto the table. You needed that dinner more than I needed a few dollars. Linda reached into her purse and carefully unfolded several worn bills. Then let me pay you back. Abigail gently pushed the money back toward her. Buy your husband fresh fruit instead. Hospitals always tell people to eat healthy, right? Linda laughed through misty eyes. You are a terrible businesswoman. Abigail grinned. Probably. Good thing I clean houses. Their conversation was interrupted when a small cardboard box slipped from the shelf above. Abigail instinctively reached to catch it, only to lose her footing on the polished floor. She landed on a pile of folded blankets with a surprised squeak instead of the dramatic crash she had expected. Dust floated into the air around her, while dozens of greeting cards scattered across the floor. Linda covered her mouth to hide a laugh, but failed completely. Abigail stared at the ceiling for one defeated second before laughing at herself. Well, at least I cushioned the blankets instead of the other way around. Even Eleanor Graves, passing through the hallway at that exact moment, paused just long enough for the corner of her mouth to almost betray a smile before her usual composure returned. Please remain upright for the rest of the afternoon, Miss Brooks. That is the goal, Abigail answered with cheerful embarrassment as she gathered the fallen cards. Upstairs, Luca had unknowingly watched the entire incident through another security monitor while reviewing estate reports. He found himself suppressing an unexpected smile. She never blamed anyone else for her mistakes. She simply stood up, brushed away the dust, and kept moving. It was a quality money could never purchase. As evening settled over the estate, Dominic entered carrying a slim folder. Background investigation, he announced. Luca opened it, expecting another routine employment history. Instead, one page immediately caught his attention. Abigail Brooks had declined a $100,000 inheritance from a distant relative 2 years earlier. The attached explanation was handwritten in her own words. She believed another branch of the family needed it more than she did. Dominic looked genuinely puzzled. People usually fight over money. Luca remained silent for several moments before closing the folder. Not everyone. At that exact moment, another encrypted notification appeared across the security screen. A vehicle had stopped just outside the estate gates without requesting permission to enter. The driver remained inside with the engine running. When the camera zoomed closer, Luca recognized the face immediately. It belonged to someone who should have been hundreds of miles away. The black sedan remained motionless beyond the front gates for nearly 10 minutes before rolling away without a single visitor requesting entry. Luca watched the security feed until the taillights disappeared beyond the tree-lined road. Dominic stood beside him in silence. Neither man believed the unexpected visitor had simply taken a wrong turn. Run the license plate, Luca said quietly. I want every movement connected to that vehicle during the last 72 hours. Dominic gave a brief nod before leaving the study. Luca remained alone, his attention drifting toward another monitor where Abigail was finishing her evening duties in the west hallway. She hummed softly while watering several potted plants, occasionally speaking to them as though they were old friends. You are doing much better than the basil I tried growing last summer, she joked before noticing one drooping fern. Do not worry. I have accidentally overwatered plants before. We will both learn. Luca almost looked away, then stopped himself. There was something strangely calming about watching someone who expected nothing from the world except another chance to do a little good. Downstairs, Abigail carried a basket of freshly folded linens toward the guest wing when she noticed a young delivery driver standing nervously near the service entrance holding several heavy boxes. He looked barely old enough to graduate college. Need a hand? She asked. The young man smiled with visible relief. These weigh more than they looked. Abigail grabbed one box with both arms. That makes 2 of us. She managed exactly 4 careful steps before the bottom of the box unexpectedly gave way. Dozens of individually wrapped coffee mugs rolled across the polished floor in every direction. Abigail closed her eyes for one hopeless second. I officially surrender, she sighed. The delivery driver laughed first. Soon Abigail joined him, chasing runaway mugs beneath tables while apologizing to everyone within earshot. Even the kitchen staff could not hide amused smiles. Moments later, Eleanor appeared, surveyed the harmless chaos, and simply handed Abigail an empty storage cart. Perhaps wheels are your friends. Abigail accepted it with an embarrassed grin. That is excellent advice. Across the hall, Dominic quietly observed the entire scene before returning upstairs. She has a remarkable talent, he told Luca. For breaking things? Luca asked with the faintest trace of amusement. For making everyone else smile after they happen. Before Dominic could answer, his secure phone vibrated. His expression changed immediately as he read the message. We have a problem. Luca accepted the tablet Dominic handed him. The security team had completed its search of digital access logs from the restricted East Wing. One employee identification badge had entered the corridor during the missing 4-minute camera blackout. Abigail Brooks. Dominic frowned. The timestamp places her there exactly when the surveillance system failed. Luca examined the report without reacting. That cannot be correct. The access log is authentic. Then someone used her badge. Dominic hesitated. There is another issue. He enlarged a second image taken by a hallway camera moments before the blackout. Abigail appeared clearly in the photograph, carrying fresh towels exactly as scheduled. Yet a second figure, wearing an identical employee uniform and matching identification badge, disappeared around the opposite corner only 3 seconds earlier. The face remained hidden beneath a cap. 2 badges, Dominic said quietly. 1 name. Luca looked from the image to the employment file still resting on his desk. Every piece of evidence now pointed toward Abigail, yet every instinct built through years of reading people refused to believe it. Someone inside the estate had carefully constructed a trail that looked too perfect to question. As the evening deepened, Abigail returned to her small room, completely unaware that suspicion had quietly settled over her. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stopped. Resting neatly on the center of her bed was the same folded cardigan she had left upstairs days earlier, along with a single handwritten note that read, "The wrong person is about to be blamed." Abigail stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the cardigan folded neatly across her bed. She recognized the soft, gray fabric immediately. She had left it in Mr. Moretti's bedroom after covering his feet during his fever, yet somehow it had found its way into the smallest room in the mansion. Resting on top was the handwritten note. "The wrong person is about to be blamed." She read the sentence 3 times before carefully turning the paper over. Nothing. No signature. No clue. No explanation. A chill crept across her shoulders that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. She quietly closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of something that refused to fit together. "Either someone has a strange sense of humor," she whispered, "or somebody really wants me to notice something." She folded the note and slipped it inside the pocket of her apron. Running to the estate manager with an anonymous warning would only make her sound suspicious. Besides, she had no proof that the message meant anything at all. Across the mansion, Luca stood inside his private office studying enlarged images from the security system. Dominic Russo had arranged every available camera angle across a wall of monitors. One image showed Abigail carrying towels exactly where she claimed she had been. Another captured the unidentified employee wearing the same uniform disappearing around the opposite corner seconds earlier. "Someone duplicated her identification badge," Dominic said. "The technology is sophisticated enough that most scanners would never detect the difference." Luca remained silent for several moments before asking, "Who benefits if?" "Everyone believes she is responsible," Dominic answered immediately. "Someone who understands how investigations work." Luca slowly nodded. "Then we stop looking at Abigail and start looking at whoever wanted us to keep looking at her." It was the first time since the investigation began that both men had moved their attention away from the obvious suspect. Later that evening, Abigail volunteered to help organize old records stored inside the estate library. Dust drifted through the warm light as she sorted boxes filled with forgotten family photographs, handwritten recipes, and holiday cards collected over decades. She smiled while reading one faded Christmas card signed by dozens of employees who had worked there long before she arrived. "Looks like this house used to laugh more," she murmured. As she reached for another storage box, something small slipped between 2 shelves and landed softly on the wooden floor. It was an old silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon. Abigail looked around the empty library. Somebody is probably missing this. Instead of keeping it, she placed it carefully on the librarian's desk with a handwritten note that read, "Found between the shelves. I hope it finds its way home." Upstairs, Luca watched the library camera replay that exact moment. He noticed something else instead. While Abigail bent to retrieve the key, another employee quietly appeared at the far end of the room. The woman paused just long enough to observe Abigail before walking away without checking out a single book. Luca enlarged the image. The face belonged to Melissa Harper, a records coordinator who had worked at the estate for nearly 6 years. Why was she there? Luca asked. Dominic searched the staff schedule. She was assigned to the accounting office on the opposite side of the property. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Melissa had no reason to enter the library. Even stranger, security logs showed she had remained there for less than 40 seconds. Luca leaned closer to the screen as another camera angle appeared. Just before leaving the library, Melissa had quietly glanced toward Abigail's apron pocket, the exact place where the anonymous note was hidden. At that same moment, Abigail felt her phone vibrate with a text from an unknown number. She opened it, and her smile disappeared. The message contained only one sentence. Do not trust anyone who already knows your name. Abigail stared at the unfamiliar message until the screen dimmed in her hand. Do not trust anyone who already knows your name. It sounded impossible. Everyone at the estate knew her name by now. The kitchen staff greeted her every morning. Linda thanked her almost every afternoon. Even Eleanor Graves addressed her with formal precision. She slipped the phone back into her apron, telling herself that anonymous messages did not deserve control over an honest day. Still, the words lingered in the back of her mind like a song she could not stop hearing. The following morning began with bright sunshine spilling across the stone courtyard. Abigail arrived early to prepare breakfast trays, hoping work would quiet her restless thoughts. She carefully balanced fresh fruit, toast, coffee, and oatmeal onto a serving cart. Nothing is going to spill today, she whispered confidently. Exactly 3 seconds later, one orange rolled off the tray, bounced across the floor, and came to rest against Dominic Russo's polished shoe. Abigail closed her eyes with theatrical defeat. I really should stop making predictions. Dominic picked up the orange and handed it back without hiding a small smile. Perhaps make fewer promises to fruit. Abigail laughed despite herself. That seems wise. Watching from the dining room entrance, Luca noticed something unusual. Dominic almost never joked with anyone. Yet around Abigail, the walls people carried seemed to lower without them realizing it. That observation stayed with him throughout the morning. Shortly before noon, Eleanor assigned Abigail to prepare the guest cottage near the lake for an unexpected visitor. The small house had remained empty for months, and dust covered nearly every surface. Abigail opened the windows to let fresh air inside before humming quietly as she worked. While replacing old linens, she discovered a framed family photograph tucked inside a closet. The glass had cracked, but the smiling faces remained untouched. She gently cleaned the frame with a soft cloth and placed it on the fireplace mantel where it could be seen instead of hidden away. Pictures should not spend their lives in closets, she murmured. She never noticed the tiny camera mounted above the bookshelf recording every movement. Back inside the main house, Luca paused the security footage after seeing Abigail restore the forgotten photograph. Dominic looked puzzled. Most people would have ignored it. Luca slowly shook his head. She leaves every room a little better than she found it. Before either man could continue, another alert appeared across the monitor. Melissa Harper had entered the archive office twice that morning without using her identification badge. Dominic immediately pulled up another camera angle. Melissa emerged carrying only a slim folder, but moments later she discreetly placed something beneath a stack of supply invoices inside the accounting room. Freeze that frame, Luca instructed. The image sharpened. It was another employee identification badge. Dominic enlarged the photograph until the printed name became visible. Abigail Brooks. Someone wants that badge to be discovered, Dominic said quietly. Luca did not answer. Instead, he stood and walked toward the accounting office himself for the first time since his supposed illness. By the time he arrived, Eleanor had already found the badge during a routine inventory check. Several employees gathered nearby, exchanging uneasy glances. Abigail had just returned from the guest cottage when Eleanor held up the badge. Miss Brooks, she said calmly. Would you care to explain why your identification was hidden inside the accounting office during restricted hours? Abigail instinctively reached for the badge clipped to her apron. Her hand stopped halfway. The clip was empty. She looked from Eleanor to the duplicate badge on the desk, then slowly shook her head. That is not possible. Before anyone could speak again, Lucas stepped into the room, his steady voice ending every whisper at once. She is telling the truth. Every eye in the room turned toward the man who was never supposed to have left his bed. The room became so quiet that even the ticking grandfather clock seemed louder than before. Abigail looked from the duplicate identification badge to Luca Moretti, unable to hide her surprise. He was supposed to be upstairs recovering. Instead, he stood calmly in the doorway wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with effortless confidence, the colorful tattoos disappearing beneath crisp sleeves and the collar of his shirt. His steady gaze swept across the gathered employees before settling briefly on Abigail. There was no accusation in his eyes, only quiet certainty. Eleanor Graves lowered the badge onto the desk. Mr. Moretti, the evidence appears straightforward. Luca walked forward without rushing. Straightforward evidence is often the easiest evidence to manufacture. No one challenged him. Dominic Russo stepped beside the desk and placed a tablet where everyone could see it. The security team has confirmed that 2 employee badges carrying Miss Brooks's identity were active during overlapping time periods. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Abigail stared at the screen, trying to understand what she was seeing. I have only ever had one badge, she said softly. Dominic nodded. We know. Eleanor folded her clipboard against her chest. Then someone created an unauthorized duplicate. Luca looked toward the assembled staff. Which means the question is no longer whether Abigail entered a restricted area. The question is who wanted everyone to believe she did. The conversation ended there. Luca dismissed the employees with a quiet gesture, allowing them to return to work before rumors could grow any larger. Abigail remained where she was, uncertain whether she should leave or apologize for something she had not done. Miss Brooks, Lucas said, his voice calmer than she expected, walk with me. She followed him through the sunlit conservatory without speaking. Colorful orchids lined the windows while a small fountain filled the space with gentle echoes. It was the first time they had ever been alone while he was fully awake. Abigail kept her hands clasped together, afraid she might accidentally say the wrong thing. Lucas stopped beside the fountain. You have been receiving anonymous messages. Abigail's eyes widened. How did you know? He answered honestly. Because whoever is sending them wants my attention as much as yours. She slowly reached into her apron pocket and handed him both handwritten notes along with the message saved on her phone. Lucas studied each one carefully before returning them. You kept every piece. Abigail shrugged awkwardly. They felt important, even if I could not explain why. A faint smile almost reached his eyes. Trusting your instincts is not the same as acting recklessly. She looked down at the rippling water. I was beginning to think everyone believed I was guilty. Luca answered without hesitation. I did not. Abigail finally looked up. Why? For a moment he said nothing. Then he glanced toward the gardens where Linda Carter was helping her husband into a waiting car after his medical appointment. Because people who quietly accept blame to protect others rarely spend their time creating traps for themselves. Abigail felt her throat tighten, not from fear, but from relief. Before she could respond, her stomach let out a loud, unmistakable growl that echoed through the glass conservatory. She closed her eyes in complete embarrassment. Please pretend that did not happen. Luca blinked once before the corner of his mouth lifted into the smallest genuine smile. Have you eaten lunch? Abigail admitted the truth with a sheepish laugh. I may have forgotten. Without another word, Luca picked up 2 sandwiches from a nearby service cart that had been prepared for a meeting and handed one to her. Investigations are easier on a full stomach. Abigail accepted it carefully. Thank you. Neither of them noticed Melissa Harper watching from an upstairs balcony through the leaves of a tall indoor palm. She quietly lowered her phone after taking a single photograph of them standing together. Seconds later, she sent the image to an unknown contact with a brief message. Phase 1 has failed. Begin Phase 2. Melissa Harper slipped her phone back into her pocket before anyone noticed she had been watching from the upper balcony. Her expression remained perfectly composed as she walked toward the records office carrying another stack of ordinary paperwork. Anyone passing her in the hallway would have seen only a dependable employee finishing another quiet afternoon. That was exactly how she preferred it. Invisible people were rarely questioned. Down in the conservatory, Abigail finished the last bite of her sandwich before realizing she had been standing beside Luca much longer than she intended. She wiped her hands with a napkin and offered him an embarrassed smile. "Thank you. I promise I normally remember lunch." Luca raised one eyebrow. "Your coworkers would probably disagree." Abigail laughed softly. "They have evidence." For the first time since she had arrived at the estate, the conversation felt surprisingly natural. There were no formal instructions, no nervous introductions, only two people sharing a peaceful moment between responsibilities. The calm did not last long. Dominic approached with measured steps, stopping only after checking that no one else stood within hearing distance. "The visitor from yesterday has been identified," he reported. Luca accepted the folder without changing expression. Inside was a photograph of the black sedan parked outside the estate gates along with the driver's identity. Nathan Keller, former cybersecurity consultant, resigned from the Moretti organization 4 years earlier under unusually quiet circumstances. Dominic lowered his voice. "He has recently accepted work with a private corporate security firm connected to several of our competitors." Luca closed the folder. "Has he entered the city before this week?" "Not according to travel records." Luca glanced briefly toward Abigail, who politely pretended not to listen while examining a flowering vine climbing across the glass wall. "Continue monitoring him," Lucas said. "Do not approach him yet." Dominic nodded before disappearing into another corridor. Abigail looked back with an apologetic smile. "I was trying very hard not to eavesdrop." "You succeeded," Luca replied. "Mostly." She laughed again, surprised that he had made what almost sounded like a joke. As they stepped outside into the gardens, warm afternoon sunlight stretched across the walking paths. Abigail noticed one of the gardeners struggling to straighten a newly planted young maple tree leaning after the recent storm. Without hesitation, she hurried over to help steady the trunk while the gardener secured the support straps. Dirt smudged across her sleeve, and one of her shoes sank into the soft ground. She looked down, sighed dramatically, and said, "I think the tree won." The elderly gardener chuckled. "It usually does." Luca watched from several yards away. She never searched for important people. She simply noticed whoever needed another pair of hands. That simple habit was becoming impossible to ignore. As evening settled over the estate, Dominic completed another review of archived surveillance footage. One forgotten camera overlooking the employee parking garage revealed something the others had missed. Melissa Harper had quietly exchanged access cards with an unidentified maintenance worker 2 days before the first security blackout. The image was distant, but one detail stood out clearly. The maintenance worker wore a silver signet ring engraved with the letter K. Dominic immediately compared it with Nathan Keller's personnel records. The same distinctive ring appeared in an old company photograph taken years earlier. He carried the evidence straight to Luca's office. Luca studied both images side by side before slowly exhaling. Melissa is not working alone. At that exact moment, Abigail returned to her room after finishing her shift. Resting against her door was a neatly wrapped paper bag with no name attached. Curious, she carried it inside and unfolded the top. Nestled between sheets of tissue paper sat a brand new employee identification badge. Attached to it was a handwritten note in familiar black ink. "Tomorrow they will prove you innocent, but they will destroy someone else instead." Abigail sat quietly on the edge of her bed, turning the new identification badge over in her hands while the anonymous note rested beside her. "Tomorrow they will prove you innocent, but they will destroy someone else instead." The sentence refused to leave her thoughts. She had spent her entire life believing that the truth eventually found its own voice. Yet someone inside the estate seemed determined to replace truth with convenience. She looked toward the window where the first light of dawn was beginning to color the sky. "If someone else gets blamed because of me," she whispered, "I will never forgive myself." The following morning, the atmosphere inside the Moretti estate felt noticeably different. Employees spoke more softly. Security officers appeared at every major hallway. Even the cheerful sounds from the kitchen seemed restrained. Dominic Russo had quietly instructed his team to monitor every access point without alarming the staff. Meanwhile, Luca remained inside his office, studying the growing collection of evidence spread neatly across his desk. The duplicate badges, the anonymous notes, the missing security footage, Melissa Harper's unexplained movements, Nathan Keller's return to the city. None of the pieces stood alone. Together, they formed a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. Dominic entered carrying another folder. Accounting completed an audit before sunrise, he reported. Nothing valuable is missing. Luca looked up. Exactly what someone wanted us to find. Dominic nodded. A perfect investigation with a perfect conclusion. Luca slowly closed the file in front of him. Real life is never that tidy. At nearly the same moment, Abigail walked toward the administration office, carrying both identification badges inside a small envelope. She had made her decision hours earlier. Whatever happened next, she would tell the truth. Eleanor Graves looked up as Abigail entered. "Can I help you?" Abigail placed the envelope gently on the desk. "I found this outside my room last night. I do not know who left it there, but I think you should have both badges." Eleanor opened the envelope and silently examined them. Before she could respond, Linda Carter appeared in the doorway, looking unusually nervous. "Miss Graves," she said carefully, "there is something I should have admitted several days ago." Abigail immediately turned toward her. "Linda, you do not have to." The older woman shook her head. "Yes, I do." She folded her trembling hands together. "The missing dinner was never Abigail's fault. She protected me because my husband had just come home after surgery. She accepted the deduction from her own paycheck without telling anyone why." Eleanor's composed expression softened almost imperceptibly. Before she could answer, Luca entered the office with Dominic beside him. He had heard enough. His eyes moved from Linda to Abigail before finally settling on the envelope resting on Eleanor's desk. "Miss Brooks," he said calmly, "you could have destroyed that duplicate badge and protected yourself." Abigail looked genuinely confused. "Why would I do that?" "Because no one would have known." She met his gaze without hesitation. "I would have known." For several quiet seconds, nobody spoke. Dominic lowered his eyes toward the floor while Eleanor carefully closed the envelope again. Luca understood something that no report, camera, or investigation could ever measure. Character revealed itself most clearly when honesty carried a personal cost. Just then, one of the estate's younger security officers hurried into the office holding a tablet. "Sir," he said, slightly out of breath. Melissa Harper just accessed the archive room again, but this time she did not realize one of the maintenance cameras had been replaced yesterday. Dominic accepted the tablet, pressed play, and everyone watched in silence as Melissa removed a sealed envelope from behind a loose wall panel. She smiled with quiet satisfaction until a second figure unexpectedly stepped into the frame from the opposite doorway. Nathan Keller had arrived before she did. The video ended before anyone inside the office could look away. Melissa Harper stood frozen in the archive room with the sealed envelope pressed tightly against her side, while Nathan Keller calmly stepped through the opposite doorway. Instead of greeting her like partners, he extended his hand without a word. Melissa hesitated only briefly before giving him the envelope. Dominic paused the recording and looked toward Luca. They were exchanging something, not hiding from each other. Luca slowly nodded. "Keep playing." The footage resumed. Nathan opened the envelope just enough to examine its contents. He smiled for the first time, then quietly removed several sheets of paper and slipped different pages back inside before handing the envelope to Melissa again. Neither of them appeared angry. Neither looked surprised. Their movements were careful, practiced, almost routine. Abigail watched the screen with growing confusion. They switched something. Dominic enlarged the image as much as possible. "Documents." Luca folded his arms. "Not money. Not jewelry. Paper." Dominic immediately contacted another member of the security team. Within minutes, they confirmed that the envelope had already been recovered from the archive room after Melissa quietly returned it to its hiding place. When the contents were examined, the answer became clear. The folder contained employee access records covering nearly 6 years. Several pages had been replaced with expertly forged copies that shifted responsibility for restricted area entries away from Nathan Keller's consulting account and toward temporary staff members, including Abigail. Dominic slowly lowered the folder onto the conference table. Someone has been rewriting history. Eleanor Graves carefully compared one original page recovered from an older backup file with the forged version. The differences were almost invisible until examined line by line. She looked toward Abigail. "You were never the target because of who you are." Abigail frowned. "Then why me?" Luca answered before anyone else could. Because you were new enough that no one would question unfamiliar records and kind enough that you would never accuse innocent people while defending yourself. The realization settled heavily across the room. Abigail remembered every anonymous note, every strange warning, every opportunity she had been given to protect only herself. Without realizing it, someone had been measuring the choices she made under pressure just as carefully as Luca had. Dominic turned back toward the monitor. There is still one question. Luca already knew which one. Who sent the notes? Before anyone could speculate further, another security officer entered carrying a small evidence bag recovered from behind the loose archive. Wall panel. Inside rested a compact digital voice recorder. Dominic pressed the playback button. After several seconds of static, a familiar voice quietly filled the room. It belonged to Nathan Keller. If you are hearing this, then Melissa ignored my instructions. I never wanted an innocent employee blamed. I agreed to expose altered records because people deserve the truth, not because someone deserved to become the replacement scapegoat. If anything happens, protect the new maid. She has done nothing except remind me that decent people still exist. Silence settled over the office, but this time it carried relief instead of uncertainty. Abigail lowered her eyes, overwhelmed that a man she had never knowingly met had tried to shield her from the beginning. Luca looked toward Dominic. Nathan was never leading this operation. Dominic understood immediately. He was trying to stop it. Eleanor slowly closed the evidence folder. Then Melissa has been following someone else's plan all along. Before anyone could respond, Dominic's secure phone vibrated once. He read the incoming message, then looked directly at Luca. We have identified every financial authorization connected to the forged records. He turned the screen so everyone could see the name attached to the approval chain. None of them expected it. The signature belonged to the one person every employee trusted without question, Dr. Harold Bennett. Several months later, the Moretti estate no longer felt like a fortress built on suspicion. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. Laughter drifted from the kitchen more often than whispered rumors, and employees walked the hallways with a sense of ease that had not existed for years. The investigation had reached its conclusion through lawful authorities, financial auditors, and documented evidence. Dr. Harold Bennett admitted that he had allowed forged records to circulate after convincing himself that protecting powerful clients justified compromising the truth. Melissa Harper accepted responsibility for altering files under pressure from promises of financial security and professional advancement. Nathan Keller's recordings and archived backups ultimately exposed the entire scheme, proving that he had spent months quietly preserving evidence instead of destroying it. Every false accusation against Abigail Brooks was formally withdrawn, and every employee whose record had been manipulated received written corrections. Luca Moretti personally insisted that each person hear the truth face to face rather than through another memo. He understood now that justice delivered without dignity still left wounds behind. On Abigail's first morning back after everything had settled, she stepped into the kitchen carrying a basket of fresh bread only to discover every member of the staff waiting inside. Linda Carter walked forward first and wrapped her in a warm embrace. Eleanor Graves, never comfortable with grand speeches, simply handed Abigail a neatly folded letter. Inside was a promotion to Household Operations Coordinator, along with a handwritten note that read, "Kindness is a qualification that cannot be taught." Abigail blinked several times before laughing through happy tears. "I was hoping for a raise," she joked softly. "This is much harder to explain to my landlord." Even Eleanor laughed out loud, surprising everyone, including herself. Later that afternoon, Luca asked Abigail to meet him in the same bedroom where everything had quietly begun. The room looked almost identical, except the heavy silence had disappeared. He stood beside the window overlooking the gardens while she entered carrying a small vase filled with fresh daisies. "I checked first," she said with a playful smile. "No one has banned flowers this time." Luca accepted the vase and placed it carefully on the nightstand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he reached into the drawer and removed the neatly folded gray cardigan she had once placed over his feet during the fever she believed was real. "I have been meaning to return this," he said. Abigail smiled. "You kept it." "I kept the reminder." She tilted her head. "Of what?" Luca looked directly into her eyes with the quiet honesty that had become stronger than any carefully guarded secret. The day everyone believed I was testing you, I eventually realized I was testing myself. Abigail frowned with gentle curiosity. What do you mean? He smiled, not with triumph, but with gratitude. I wanted proof that trust still existed. Instead, I found someone who offered compassion when she believed nobody was watching. You never tried to impress me. You never asked for anything. You simply chose kindness over convenience every single time. Abigail lowered her gaze, suddenly shy. My grandpa always said that people become who they are when they think no one can see them. Luca nodded slowly. He was right. He reached into his pocket and produced one final envelope. This one contained no anonymous warning, no hidden threat, and no mystery. Inside rested a deed transferring ownership of a small lakeside cottage on the estate into Abigail's name, along with a simple handwritten invitation asking if she would help him build a future defined by honesty instead of fear. Abigail looked at the papers, then at Luca, and quietly laughed through tears that refused to stop falling. You know, she said, I almost quit during my first week because I kept dropping things. Luca chuckled softly. You did. I still do. Perhaps, he answered, gently taking her hand. But somehow you always leave people better than you found them. Outside, the maple tree she had once helped straighten after the storm stood tall beneath the afternoon sky, its branches swaying gently in the warm breeze. Inside the mansion, fear had finally surrendered to trust, strangers had become family, and two hearts that met through an impossible test stepped forward together without pretending to be anyone else. Sometimes the greatest victory is not discovering who deserves your loyalty. It is discovering the one person who teaches you how to deserve theirs.